Production of Being Well is made possible in part by Sarah Bush Lincoln Health System, supporting healthy lifestyles, eating a heart-healthy diet, staying active, managing stress, and regular checkups are ways of reducing your health risks. Proper health is important to all at Sarah Bush Lincoln Health System. Information available at sarahbush.org. Dr. Ruben Boyajian, located at 904 Medical Park Drive in Effingham, specializing in breast care, surgical oncology, as well as general and laparoscopic surgery. More information online or at 347-2255. Rediscover Paris. Our patient care and investments in medical technology show our ongoing commitment to the communities of East Central Illinois. Paris Community Hospital Family Medical Center. HSHS St. Anthony's Memorial Hospital, delivering healthcare close to home. From advanced surgical techniques and testing to convenient care for your family, HSHS St. Anthony's makes a difference each and every day. St. Anthony's, where you come first. Thanks for joining us for this edition of Being Well. I'm Lori Banks, and today we're talking about teen and parent communication. And if you've got a teenager, you know that sometimes that can be a challenge. And to help us sort of navigate through that process, Dr. Angela Yoder from Eastern Illinois University joins us today. Thanks for coming back.
Thank you for having me.
Well, the last time we had you on the show, you were talking about child-parent communication. We said we need another show on teenager and parent communication because it's so different.
They require their own show.
Yeah. Tell us real quick a little bit about your background and what you teach here at Eastern.
Well, I'm a licensed psychologist, and I've taught at Eastern since 2006, and I love working with children and teens, and that's been most of my professional experience with children.
We should mention you're in the Department of Counseling and Student Development, too.
Yes.
So is it common for parents and children have this great relationship, and then all of a sudden it just starts to go downhill as the child gets older?
It certainly changes. Research hasn't really shown that huge time of storm and stress that we once thought would always happen with teens, and in fact some teens go through their adolescent period and don't have a lot of storm and stress, and for those parents that's a more delightful experience. But certainly some teens have developmental tasks and behaviors that make it very difficult for parents and teens to navigate.
What are some of the things that parents start to see as cues or clues that their child is becoming a teenager? Behaviorally, those changes, what are the things that they see?
Well, behaviorally, that is one thing. Oftentimes the first thing they notice are physical changes, and really even physically they have, we call them kind of big paws and feet, and their hands and feet do grow at an accelerated rate, and it often makes them a little clumsy, which contributes to some of that social awkwardness or embarrassment, which kind of leads us into different behaviors. So sometimes kids will tend to prefer spending more time with their peers, and in fact we know that part of the brain, that reward circuitry, is lit up oftentimes when they're with their peers, so they find that more rewarding, and that's normal. So we often see that working to establish one's identity, some arguing, things like that.
What are some of the common areas that seem to butt heads between parents and teenagers? Are there certain themes that seem to be an area?
Certainly even teens will acknowledge that parents have to have some amount of control and that they have to be parents and set consequences. It's usually those personal issues that tend to create the most fireworks.
Let's talk a little bit about in a teenager's brain and how they think and process. Just like when you were here with the children's show, we tend to think, oh, they're just smaller adults, but their brain does not work the way ours does.
Absolutely.
What's going on in the teenager's brain?
Absolutely. Well, first of all, some exciting research has shown that the teen's brain continues to develop up until early to mid-20s. Okay. So in particular, one of the areas that we see that's different and changing a lot is the prefrontal cortex. And that's kind of like the CEO of our brains. It's right behind our forehead and helps us to problem solve, to engage in rational thinking. It controls a little bit of impulsivity. So certainly that is still developing. And you're right, oftentimes we do think about little kids walking at a certain age, talking at a certain age. With teenagers, they still have developmental tasks that they're growing and learning, and we need to keep that in mind.
So is the way that teenagers reason or think about problems still different than the way adults do? Are they less rational?
Definitely. Yeah, definitely. And some of us can reflect back on some of our own choices and think, what was I thinking? And that really is due to some of that prefrontal cortex still pruning. There's still myelinization that's happening in the brain. And so that's certainly the case.
What are some things that parents need to start maybe changing the ways in which they communicate with their teen? You know, this worked great when they were a child, and now this methodology is no longer effective.
Right.
What are some things that they can do to work on their relationship with their teen and better communicate with them?
Yeah, well, one of the things that will help, I think, is for parents to remember that their relationship with their teen is just that. It's a relationship. And so that relationship needs to be nurtured and maintained, and there needs to be positive occurrences in the relationships, recognition of good behavior as well as consequences for not so good behavior.
And you had talked about, alternative forms of communication. You often hear, teens, it's maybe not like, oh, I want to sit on the couch and talk to mom and dad the way they did when they were a little kid.
Absolutely.
That you've got to be maybe a little more creative with that.
Absolutely. So teens often find that face-to-face discussion can be a little bit threatening for them, and to create a little bit more distance and safety, engaging in play activities together like playing basketball, shooting some hoops, going for a drive, remove some of the intensity because you don't look at each other when you, or hopefully you're not looking at each other when you drive. Cooking together, doing things together while they're talking can be useful.
All right, in talking to some of the staff people here at the station who have teens now or have had teens in the past, two things came up, and it's setting boundaries and independence. Let's talk about boundaries for teenagers because they're growing. They want to be able to go out and explore and do things without as much supervision. How should parents attack boundaries?
Absolutely. Well, it's a scary time for parents because as kids age, the risk for their poor behavior, they get higher and they get more intense, and that's scary for parents, understandably so. So parents need to keep in mind that they want to have a nice balance between kids are wanting a lot of responsibility, they're wanting a lot of freedom, but with that freedom comes a sense of responsibility. So each child is very unique, and the parent really needs to continually monitor whether or not what they're doing is working with the child. So in other words, they grant some small amount of freedom and then kind of check and monitor how the teen is able to handle that. So some parents feel like it's either one or the other, but really this is a delicate balance all the way into adulthood as you're continually monitoring what each personal child can handle. And
in your private practice years, did you find that when you talk to teenagers, they really wanted boundaries, even though they say they don't?
Absolutely. Boundaries help us to feel safe. And we don't want to live in a world where literally anything goes because that makes us feel unsafe. And most teens will recognize in their calmer, more rational moments that parents need to have a sense of control over them. And in fact, the research thankfully supports that balance of responsiveness and being warm and loving and understanding and empathic of the child's feelings balanced with high demandingness is really one of the things that's most helpful for teens.
I think along with boundaries comes independence. They're getting a driver's license and maybe getting a job and getting their own money, which is great. So how do you balance the independence with still wanting to have some control over what's going on?
I think, sitting down with teens not in the moment, right? So working proactively and talking about family values as a family and what do we value and how will that inform the decisions that we're going to make. Listen to your child and allow them to have some input. That doesn't mean you need to go with their plan, but it does require that you allow their voice to be heard, and that's an important thing. And again, the continual monitoring helps you to know what you need to tweak. Really, the responsibility for choosing and problem solving should be gradual, and it should start very young. So even young kids, we tend to give them a little bit of disrespect, not allow them to choose their clothing and things like that. There are some issues that parents can examine and think, if the child chooses the outcome that I don't like, what are the consequences for their long-term health? And if there really are none, then let the child choose that. If it is something that threatens their personal safety, that violates a family value, then that is the time to step in.
That's what I was going to bring about. When is talking about what we value in our family and what's important, that should be an ongoing conversation.
Yes.
That doesn't start when they're teenagers. It starts from the time they're small and carries on through.
Absolutely. And really, because that prefrontal cortex is still developing, teens tend to be more impulsive. And so they make decisions that in the moment that they may not make if they are feeling more rational and calm. So therefore, kind of talking about situations that might come up. What do you do if a drunk friend wants to get behind the wheel? How do you handle that? And making yourself open and approachable, not a friend, but an open, approachable parent that can tolerate hearing about some of the things that teens are doing.
That's what we had this conversation yesterday in the office about, how do you as a parent be open and approachable, but knowing that your child may talk about things that inside you really don't want to hear, but you need to, and then you kind of have to listen and not be horrified at the same time. How do you balance that?
Well, remember that time is on your side, and this too shall pass. Having patience and knowing that your child will eventually grow into an adult, that's the idea, and that you're there to help them practice some of those problem-solving skills, help them practice utilizing family values to make decisions. And if you give it enough time during the conversation without jumping in and saying, no, you should do this, which will often activate the child's defenses, make them angry, and turn into an argument. If you give it a little bit more time, what you sometimes find is that the child makes the exact same decision that you would recommend, and they do it on their own. And so they've had some good practice, and then you can positively reinforce that type of thinking and let them know how proud you are of them. But working proactively helps kind of prime their thinking for when those occurrences do happen.
So do you think if your teenager knows, if you set it out there that says, whatever you tell me, I'm going to listen, I'm going to try to not be judgmental, is that helpful in getting your teen to open up about things because mom or dad is just going to listen first and maybe react later? It
is. I think letting the teen know that you're going to try to suspend judgment and then actually trying to do that. I think that is, it's a little bit more difficult than it sounds, because usually a parent's fear is activated and they start using a lot of questions, which makes the teen feel interrogated. So remember, the child is sitting in front of you. They're in no danger now. Slow things down. Use empathic listening. Let them know that you see their point of view, and take the pace down slower to see how much the teen will share with you and see if they can work through it on their own.
What about actual times to communicate? Whose terms should it be on? Should it be you call, Angie into the room and say, I need to talk to you? Is it better that the parent initiates that, or should the parent kind of wait for the child to initiate it?
Well, in any kind of relationship, there's reciprocity, and so there's give and take. And so it shouldn't be completely imbalanced on one side or the other. But parents do need to be aware in their continual monitoring that we talked about in terms of when the teen tends to be more talkative. So for example, there's a lot of good research that shows that kids are more active at night, and most of us parents, we're exhausted at night, so we don't necessarily feel like talking. So it may be something that you can schedule ahead of time for a weekend. That's going to be some special time that you're going to have together to talk. But I think if your teen approaches you and you're busy, you could ask for a separate time, or if this is an okay time for you, turn the TV off, turn the smartphone off, and really focus on them.
One of our staff people shared a great story of how she has two daughters, and they're fairly close in age, and she used kind of actually later at night, sometimes after they would come home from being out.
Yes.
They would sit and talk, no TV on, and they would open up, and she said that not being judgmental and horrified was difficult, but those girls knew that, and then they were more likely to open up. So I thought that was a great approach.
Absolutely. I think, one of the tips I would give is to show a friendly curiosity. Sometimes you find yourself kind of wanting to recoil, like, what? Where were you? What was happening? But to lean forward and say, oh, tell me more about that. And to be curious and ask questions about their culture, their music, what's new.
What about for a child or a teenager that becomes communicative, sort of hides away in their room? Should we automatically assume the worst?
mean, you hear stories of bad things that are happening because the child sort of pulled away from the family and mom and dad, they could never get him to talk. What do you do? That's a scary time.
It is, yeah. I think anytime a teen becomes completely non-communicative, I would be concerned and to seek help from a licensed therapist, someone with experience working with teens, because not all therapists are created equal in terms of being able to tolerate some of the behaviors that teens.
So what point would that become concerned, like after a week or a month or?
Well, I think one of the things that you want to look at is, are they communicating in different ways? Because it is normal for a teen to need more private time than they did when they were a child. Some of that is from the ability to take into account differing perspectives and what we think of as formal operational thought. So teens are now able to see things from other people's perspective, but they're not really adept at it yet. So there's a lot of practicing, a lot of brooding that goes on where they're thinking about things, and so they need more quiet time. My concern would be if there's only quiet time and they're not communicating at all. It could be that they've withdrawn from you because they're upset about something and the relationship needs repair and they're doing fine at school. So good communication, my husband and I like to think about people being on our team, right? People that are helping us raise this child into a responsible citizen and communicating with those other folks.
What about the advent of texting, social media? I mean, that is something that you and I did not have.
Right,
the internet wasn't invented when I was a teenager. It was, but no one knew what it was. We didn't have computers then. But now you have social media, all these different things that I don't even know what they do or what they are. That proposes a whole other challenge for parents. And how do they keep up with all these different things like Snapchat and,
it's interesting. When I was working with teens early on in my career, I was running an intensive outpatient group, and I wasn't doing very well with them. And part of it was that I didn't really understand their culture, and when I would ask them about their own life, they shut down and withdrew. And I created a game called Educating Angie, where I gave them prizes for teaching me something about teen culture that I didn't know, and they absolutely loved it. So teens will oftentimes talk with you about things that other kids at school are doing, trends that are happening, apps that are out there, because they really do enjoy being an expert and teaching you something because it's very different than how things have been. And so you might just show an interest in music. What are people listening to? Oh, that's interesting. You don't necessarily have to turn it into a game like I did, but teens will educate you about what's happening. The other thing is to develop relationships with the children's parents that your teen is hanging out with, and being able to communicate with them can be really helpful. Two heads are often better than one.
So what should you do if you find out, your teenager is being bullied online? I mean, is that something, I guess every child is different, whether they're going to say something to you or not, but that, how do you get through that as a parent?
I think one of the pieces of advice I would give is not to tell the child just to ignore it. I think that was kind of the wisdom when we were growing up, and we now know that that's not very useful. And some of the newer research is kind of focused on bystanders and having bystanders step in. The other thing you can do individually with your child is to kind of help them deconstruct why those things happen and what might be behind a bully's words, because bullying is not just detrimental to the victim, it's also detrimental to the bully. So again, if you have those relationships with other parents, if you can believe the best in the other parent, that they're doing the best they can, and to contact them under that premise, these are some things I'm concerned about. I'm worried both of our kids are hurting. What can we do to help with this? I think that can be a useful thing for parents to do as well. And also, I think, don't forget that the school often has policies on bullying, and a good school counselor can often help you with this as well.
Angie, what should we do if you come across, maybe it's a bullying message on your child's phone? How do you bring that up to them? Because, it may be seen as you're invading their privacy. This may be something they didn't want you to know about. How do you bring that up?
Well, I think kids should know that you are monitoring them ahead of time, so it's not a surprise that you found out. And I think you should approach them with an open mind, not accusing them or not over-dramatizing it, being kind of matter of fact, and choose a time when the teen is calm and has had plenty of sleep and can deal with that challenge. And I would confront it directly.
All right. What about how much you talked about this earlier, but how much privacy? You'd said teenagers need more privacy. how much do they need? What's the line between letting them, hang out in their room all the time and you being just in their space all the time?
Well, that's going to be different for every child. In fact, the American Academy of Pediatricians is coming out with new guidelines for screen time, and they're supposed to be out in the fall. And so we have to recognize that social media, technology, it's a part of our world, and that teens, that's one way that they communicate. So you have to allow some of that, but it has to be balanced and individualized for that particular child.
Okay. We've got about 5 minutes left, and I know you've got some great advice for sort of parent communication do's and don'ts.
Yeah.
Let's talk about the don'ts first.
I would say don't take it personally. I think and that's really much easier said than done.
Especially when they say, I hate you, Mom.
Yeah, know remind yourself that part of their brain that governs impulses and rational thinking is still developing. And so they're much more liable to say things that they don't mean in the heat of the moment, and we need to forgive them for that. It doesn't mean that we don't set consequences, but that we set those consequences without a lot of emotionality.
So don't take it personally.
Yes. Also not listening. I think sometimes parents immediately get worried and they start asking a lot of questions. It's important to know your teen's perspective and to be able to communicate that you understand their feelings as well.
All right. What else? I know you've got those written down.
I would say don't forget to reward positive behavior. Sometimes the relationship gets off balance and we focus more on what we're worried about, what we're scared about, and we forget about all those great things the teen is doing well. So even orchestrating an intentional conversation that you have with a spouse or a co-parent or another adult that the child overhears you complimenting them can be really useful.
Yeah.
Another thing is parenting based off of one's own mood, and that
you've had a bad day.
Yes, and I can relate to that. It's kind of the straw that broke the camel's back, and we react rather than respond. And so we need to learn how to walk away and remember that time is on our side, to consult with other parents, people that we trust, and dole out positive consequences that will help them become better adults. Know when I was your age speeches. So kids feel things very deeply at this age, and also their developmental task of kind of returning to egocentrism. They have what's called an imaginary audience, where they do feel like everyone is looking at them and judging them, and also the personal fable, where they feel like there's no way they could be understood fully by another human being. Those things are very real for them. So trying to talk that out of the teen is kind of like telling a toddler there's no monsters under the bed. It's just part of their development that we have to accept and know that that's normal.
All right. Is that the list of don'ts?
Yes.
Okay.
One more, I guess. Okay. Failing to apologize. So we're all human beings.
We all mess up sometimes.
We're all going to mess up. And our children learn how to do things from their family unit. And one social skill that they need to learn is how to apologize appropriately. So some parents fear that if they admit a mistake, it will make them look incompetent in their child's eyes. But on the contrary, it can be a really important learning moment. Don't be afraid to go offer your child an apology. It doesn't mean that you were necessarily wrong, but perhaps the
context was wrong, or that your mood, your bad day at work carried over to them.
It's a relationship.
Apology goes a long way with people.
Absolutely, absolutely.
All right, so what do we have on the do list?
The do list is to use active listening. So do paraphrase. Use paraphrasing where you let the child know that you heard them. So it sounds like you had a really rough day today at school, instead of jumping into a bunch of questions, which can actually backfire and make people feel defensive. Number 2 would be consider alternate forms of communication, which we had talked about. Hopping in the car to go get an ice cream or shooting some hoops can be useful rather than sitting and having direct eye contact. Yeah, that can be hard for them. Third would be to be a thermostat, not a thermometer. So in your house when it gets hot, the thermostat responds and it will turn up the air conditioner so that it cools things down. Where a thermometer, the mercury goes up as the temperature goes up, and sometimes our altercations with teens can get like that. The child gets angry, we get angry. They yell, then we yell. And what you want to do is to be a thermostat instead.
Things down.
And to be responsive. And again, to remember that you don't have to decide what to do right now. if you're in doubt, always do the next thing that will preserve your relationship with your child. That doesn't necessarily mean to give in. It just means to avoid saying detrimental things that can cause pain for sometimes years and damage the relationship. Fourth would be a parent and monitor what they're ready for. So natural and logical consequences are best when we can have those. And if not, think about the child's currency. So for some kids, taking away their car is not as big of a deal as taking away their phone. So keep that in mind. Another piece of advice would be to offer 30 minutes of special time together that's completely uninterrupted, no siblings, no spouse, no boyfriend or girlfriend, but just the two of you. And it's just 30 minutes, doing something together that you both enjoy. So give them a list of 3 things and use all those active listening skills during that time. And then lastly, I would say seek help if necessary. There's lots of great licensed therapists out there with experience working with teens and families. And teens will often be defensive if you say, I'm taking you to counseling. What you need to say is, we're going to go get some help as a family so that we can get along better.
And sometimes that outside third party can be really helpful.
Absolutely.
They have no connection to you in the past or the present.
That's
and
right.
They can shed some light on what's going on.
That's right. It provides some neutral ground where everybody's on a little bit better behavior, and it's a concentrated time where you can work on things, and then you can walk away and take a little bit of time until you come back the next time.
Angela, we're all out of time. Thanks so much for coming by this show and giving us some great advice and things to think about, especially for those people out watching who may be going through that challenging time with their teenager.
Well, thank you. I come with a lot of humility. Parenting teens is not for the faint of heart, but be patient.
It will get better. This too shall pass.
That's right.
Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Production of Being Well is made possible in part by Sarah Bush Lincoln Health System, supporting healthy lifestyles, eating a heart-healthy diet, staying active, managing stress, and regular checkups are ways of reducing your health risks. Proper health is important to all at Sarah Bush Lincoln Health System. Information available at sarahbush.org. Dr. Ruben Boyajian, located at 904 Medical Park Drive in Effingham, specializing in breast care, surgical oncology, as well as general and laparoscopic surgery. More information online or at 347-2255.
Rediscover Paris.
Our patient care and investments in medical technology show our ongoing commitment to the communities of East Central Illinois. Paris Community Hospital Family Medical Center. HSHS St. Anthony's Memorial Hospital, delivering healthcare close to home. From advanced surgical techniques and testing to convenient care for your family, HSHS St. Anthony's makes a difference each and every day. St. Anthony's, where you come first.